Elmore was never really a town. That's the thing I always come back to about Gumball. It was a collection, a pile of characters from completely different places, drawn in completely different styles, some of them not even drawn at all somehow living on the same street and going to the same school and queuing at the same supermarket. 6 seasons of that, ending in 2019, and then a long, quiet stretch before it came back. And an enormous number of the people in it turned up exactly once. One episode, sometimes one scene, a name, a voice, occasionally a whole storyline built around them, and then nothing at all. So that's tonight. The giants, the doppelgangers, the puppets, the ones who got deleted for being boring. We'll take them as they come. And nothing needs hurrying. Subscribing helps if you're enjoying these. And that's the last I'll say about it. Otherwise, make yourself comfortable. Here's the detail that makes this whole video make sense, and I don't think enough people know it. Ben Bockley did not sit down one day and invent a blue cat. He had a folder. Before Gumball, Bockley worked in commercial animation in London, including a stretch at Studio AKA, where he was a young director trying to win pitches, and mostly not winning them. That's the normal experience of that job, by the way. You draw a family of characters for a yogurt advert, you present it, the client goes with something else, and the characters go into a drawer and stay there. He kept the drawer. In 2007, Cartoon Network set up a development studio in Europe, based in London, and Bockley was hired to help other people pitch their ideas to the network, which is a genuinely strange job when you think about it. You spend your days sitting across from other creators, helping them sharpen the thing they've been dreaming about, and then watching most of those things not get made. Then the studio said that staff could pitch too, and rather than come up with something new, Bockley went to the drawer. He pulled out the characters that had been rejected from commercials over the years, the ones that had never found a home, and he put them all in one place. A school. All the rejects in one building. His original version of that idea was a show about reject cartoon characters attending a remedial school. That was the pitch. That was the actual concept. The producers said it was too sad. I love that. I love it because they were completely right and also completely wrong at the same time. It is too sad. It's a show about a building full of things nobody wanted, being taught how to be adequate. That's not a children's cartoon. That's a short film that wins something at a festival and makes everyone quiet on the way home. So he rewrote it, made it warmer, gave it a family at the centre, took the structure of a domestic sitcom and put the rejects around the edges of it. And that version worked. Daniel Leonard at Turner greenlit it, and the show premiered in May 2011. Bockley named the parents and the little sister after his own mother, father and sister. Nicole, Richard, Anis, which is a lovely bit of trivia on its own, but sits a bit oddly next to the rest of it. The core family came from his actual life. Everyone else came from the reject pile. And once you know that, you start seeing it everywhere in the design language of the show. Because that's the honest explanation for why Gumball's girlfriend is a peanut with antlers. And his best mate at school is a banana who mostly doesn't wear trousers. And there's a cloud person, a ghost, a T-Rex rendered in CGI, a talking piece of toast, and a robot, all in the same classroom, all drawn as if they were designed by different people in different decades. Because they were. Nobody sat down and decided that this collection of creatures made sense together. They were assembled. And the show's answer to the obvious question of why they all look like they've been cut out of different magazines was simply to never explain it, which is by far the correct choice. Elmore is a collage, and the show has the confidence to just let that be true. There's something I find genuinely encouraging about this as a piece of career advice, if you can call it that. The work that got rejected wasn't wasted, it was just early. All those failed pitches turned into the most stylistically distinctive cartoon of its decade. And the only reason it looks like that is because it was built out of leftovers. But there's a shadow to it as well, and the shadow is what this whole video is about. If you build a town out of characters nobody wanted, you have made a town where being unwanted is the default condition. Gumball is the one with the show named after him. Darwin's on the poster. Anais gets to be the clever one. Everybody else is holding a door open somewhere in the background, waiting to be needed. And the show knew that. That's the part that always gets me. It knew exactly what it was, and it kept poking at it. Over 6 seasons, it built up an entire mythology around the idea of being surplus to requirements. It gave the background cast a musical number where they demanded to be noticed. It gave one of them a full villain arc, built entirely on the grievance of having been forgotten. It invented a physical location where discarded characters are stored. The too sad version of the show never got made, but it kept leaking through the walls of the version that did. Now, before we go and meet the people who vanished, we should probably talk about where the show says they went, because Gumball is one of very few programs that bothered to answer that question on screen. Season 3, an episode called The Void, and it starts with something small, which is why it works. Gumball notices a photograph that's slightly blurry in one spot, not damaged, not torn, just wrong. A patch of the image where something ought to be and isn't, and the picture has smoothed itself over to cover the gap. Then there's a locker at school that doesn't exist anymore, except the corridor hasn't got shorter, so where did the space go? The answer is that the world folded over it. That's the mechanic. Elmore, it turns out, is a place that quietly edits itself. When the universe decides that something in it is a mistake, that thing gets removed, and every trace of it goes too. It comes out of photographs, its house disappears, and the street closes up like a zip. And crucially, nobody remembers, because the memories go as well. The cleanup is total. You don't notice the deletion because the noticing has also been deleted. And it isn't only people. This is the part I find most enjoyable about the whole concept. The Void takes anything the world has decided was a bad idea. Objects, inventions, board games, fashion styles that have aged badly, prototypes that didn't work, claims that turned out to be wrong. Pluto is in there. Pluto the planet, sitting in a dimension full of discarded rubbish. Because at some point the universe changed its mind about whether Pluto counted. That gag has no business being as good as it is. Gumball and Darwin work all this out, more or less by accident, and they go and get Mr. Small to help. Mr. Small, the school counsellor, the hippie, the one who is usually wrong about everything in a way that's played for laughs, except here he isn't wrong. He knows. He's known for ages because he's been searching for someone called Janice, who he loves and cannot properly remember, and the only reason he remembers her at all is that he wears a tinfoil hat. The tinfoil hat works. That's the joke. The conspiracy man with the foil on his head has been correct this entire time, and everyone's been humouring him, so the three of them put on hats and go in. The inside of the Void is the best thing in the episode. It's not scary, exactly. It's a landfill. It's a vast, low-gravity space full of everything the world threw away, drifting about with no particular arrangement. And the gravity keeps changing direction, because there's no reason for it not to. At one point, Gumball and Darwin move around by spraying hairspray from the 80s, which is in there, because 80s hairspray was extremely toxic, and the world binned the whole idea. They find who they came for, they get out, and then, before they can tell a single person what they've seen, their hats get pulled off and sucked back through the portal, and all three of them forget everything, which means the audience knows and the characters don't. The show established in one 11-minute episode that its own universe is sentient, judgmental, and actively removing anyone it finds insufficiently interesting, and then made sure nobody in it could ever do anything about it. There's one last shot. Banana Barbara, who paints the future without knowing she's doing it, is shown with a canvas of the Watterson family, looking terrified as Elmore collapses into the void. Nobody comments on it. The episode just ends. The revival, years later, went back and made that worse in a way I genuinely respect. There's an episode called The Rewrite, which establishes that the void will consume the whole universe when the show gets cancelled, or if the main characters ever work out that they're fictional. So the thing that eats forgotten characters is also the thing waiting at the end of the series. It's the same mechanism at both scales. Anyway, that's the framework. From here on, I'll just refer to it as the void, and you'll know what I mean. Let's go and meet the girl they went in for. Molly is a small sauropod. Long neck, dark grey, arms held in front of her, head permanently tilted so you can see both eyes at once, 2 little pink blush lines on her cheeks. And she is drawn. That's the detail I want to start with, because it's easy to miss and it tells you something. Elmore's other dinosaur is Tina Rex, who is rendered in CGI. Tina is a proper 3D model stomping around in a 2D world, which is exactly why she's frightening. She has weight. She doesn't belong to the same layer of reality as the kids she's bullying. Molly isn't that. Molly is flat, hand-drawn, soft-edged, and shares a visual language with the background children. She's a dinosaur with none of the advantages of being a dinosaur. Whoever designed her made a very deliberate decision to take the most dramatic possible species and render it in the least dramatic possible way, which is, in hindsight, the entire character. Because in season 1, she's just there. She's in the class, she's in crowd shots, she has the occasional line. And then somewhere between seasons she stops appearing, in the way that background children on any cartoon stop appearing, and nobody would have thought about it again. Except the show went back for her. The reason Molly was erased, according to Mr. Small's reasoning in the episode, is that she was boring. That's it. The world had a look at her, found her uninteresting, and filed her with the failed prototypes and the bad hairspray. I want to sit with that for a second, because it's a genuinely startling thing for a children's show to do. Molly hasn't done anything wrong. She isn't a villain, she isn't annoying, she hasn't been written badly. Her offence is being unremarkable. The universe of the programme performed an audit on a child, found her insufficiently entertaining, and disposed of her. And the boys don't even notice she's missing at first. They have to work it out forensically, from a blurred photo and a gap in a corridor, because there's nothing left of her to miss. Now, here's the bit that saves it from being simply cruel, and it's why I like the episode as much as I do. They go and get her anyway. Nobody makes an argument that Molly's secretly fascinating. Nobody discovers her hidden depths. She doesn't get a moment where she reveals a talent and earns her place back. The show doesn't do the easy version, where the boring girl turns out to be amazing all along, which is what almost any other programme would have done with this setup. She's just a person, and being a person is enough, so they carry her out. And then, afterwards, she's still boring. That's the punchline, and it's a good one. Molly comes back into the show, and she is exactly as she was. She's in the background. She gets a few lines here and there. She's around, mildly, in the way she always was. Some of her old friendships come back. Nothing about her has been upgraded. The show made a point of rescuing her and then made an equally firm point of not changing her. I find that quietly excellent. Most shows can't resist justifying a character's existence. Gumball just decided that Molly gets to be dull and gets to exist, and those two facts don't need to be reconciled. There's also the small sad footnote that she doesn't remember any of it. Nobody who went in remembers. Molly was deleted from the universe, held in a bin dimension for an unspecified length of time, and retrieved by 3 people. and as far as she's aware, nothing happened at all. Which is probably kinder when you think about it. She's got no idea the world once looked at her and made a decision. Someone else in that dimension did know though. He was in there the whole time, and he was shouting. There's a moment in Rob's backstory that I think about more than I'd like to admit. Gumball and Darwin are in the void, moving through the rubbish looking for Molly, and somewhere in the middle distance, off camera, out of shot, in a part of the frame the episode never showed us, there is a boy calling for help. They don't hear him. They leave. The portal shuts. That's Rob. Before any of that, Rob was nothing. He was a tall grey cyclops with spiky black hair and a red jumper, standing in the corridors of Elmore Junior High in the first couple of seasons. Occasionally in shot, essentially never relevant. If you re-watch early episodes now, you can spot him. At the time, nobody did, because there was nothing to spot. He was set dressing with a face, which meant the world took a look at him, applied the same audit it applied to Molly, and binned him for having no discernible purpose. He got out on his own, eventually, by grabbing hold of the van as it went through the portal. And the show is very clear that this was not a clean exit. Leaving the void recklessly, or in a damaged state, does something to you. Rob came out wrong, permanently. His body glitches and fractures, and goes polygonal at the edges, like a texture that hasn't loaded, and it never fixes itself. He's been badly rendered ever since. He turns up again in an episode where Gumball and Darwin find something living in their basement, a misshapen figure that flickers, that can't remember its own name, that describes itself as a nobody with no purpose in the world, and the boys, being who they are, decide to help. Which in Gumball's case means solving the problem in the most Gumball way available. He points out that Elmore doesn't currently have a proper bad guy, and suggests the stranger take the job. That's what unlocks the memory. Being offered a role, the moment he's told there's a slot in the story he could occupy, everything comes back. And he remembers that his name is Rob, and that he used to be in this show. I've always thought that's a devastating bit of writing for a Cartoon Network 11-minute. His identity doesn't return when he sees his old school, or his old friends, or a photograph. It returns when someone tells him he could be useful. So he becomes the villain. Properly? Costume, lair, schemes, monologues, the lot, and the grievance underneath it is very specific, which is what elevates him above being a standard cartoon nemesis. Rob isn't angry that Gumball is a nice person or a horrible person. He's angry that Gumball is the protagonist. He worked out, somewhere in that dimension, that he lives inside a story about somebody else, and that the only reason he was allowed back into it is that a lead character had a vacancy to fill. He wasn't good enough to exist on his own terms. He was only good enough to be the obstacle. There's a later episode where he takes over the show entirely and runs a sequence of pitches for what the programme would look like if it followed literally anyone else, which is exactly the sort of thing you'd do if your entire complaint was about screen time. Now, the thing I want to be careful about here is making Rob sound more tragic than he plays, because he is also, quite often, useless. He tried to destroy the Elmore Dam. He destroyed a vending machine. He came extremely close to getting away with $1 million and failed at the final step because he picked up the suitcase with the bomb in it rather than the suitcase with the money in it. He gets better at it over the seasons, and by the end, he's a genuine threat with a genuine plan, but the show never lets him become slick. There's always a bit of the background character still in him, the sense of a man doing an impression of a villain he's seen on television, because that is precisely what he is. And there's one more layer which I'll mention and then leave, because it belongs to a different conversation. Rob eventually understands more about the nature of his world than any other character in it. He works out what's coming. He tries to warn people, and nobody listens because he's the villain, and villains saying the world is going to end is just what villains do. The nobody from the corridor ends up being the only one who's right, and it doesn't help him at all. Rachel is Tobias's older sister, and she's the clearest example on the whole show of a character who simply stopped. She's in season 1, and only season 1 really, around 8 appearances, most of them small. She's tall, turquoise, with big rainbow hair going yellow into magenta, and a white and gold headband, because the whole Wilson family wears those. She looks like her mum. Tobias looks like a cloud with legs. So Rachel got the better end of the genetic arrangement there. Her personality, in the handful of scenes she gets, is straightforward teenage disdain. She's older than Gumball's class and she wants everyone to know it. She refers to her brother's friends as loser babies, or dweeb loser babies depending on the day, and she'd rather they weren't in her house. Then comes The Party, which is the one episode built around her, and it's better than it needed to be. The setup is that Rachel is throwing a party while the parents are out, and Tobias blackmails her into letting his classmates come by, threatening to tell on her. So she agrees, furiously, and the younger kids arrive, and the episode goes about its business being an episode about Gumball trying to find a date, and then none of Rachel's actual friends turn up. Nobody comes. The party is her brother's 12-year-old classmates, wrecking her parents' house. And that's the entire guest list, and she goes outside and cries about it. Darwin finds her, and Darwin, being Darwin, doesn't say anything clever. He just starts cleaning up the house. That's his response to seeing someone upset. Tidy the thing that's upsetting them. She calms down. She tells him he's not so bad for a kid. She kisses him on the cheek. That's it. That's Rachel Wilson's entire emotional arc in the show, and I'd argue it's a genuinely nice one. She goes from being a stock older sister obstacle to a teenager whose social life has just publicly collapsed. And the show gives her about 90 seconds of being a real person before the episode moves on. And then she's gone. Season 2, she appears as a pop-up window on a computer screen. That's not a character appearance, that's a joke about internet advertising that happens to use her design. Season 5, there's a flashback in The Matchmaker that reuses the kiss from The Party, and Terry says her name out loud. So the show remembered she existed. It just didn't have anything to do with her. The official answer, when it finally came, arrived in a spin-off. In Darwin's yearbook, Tobias mentions that Rachel went off to college, which is both completely reasonable and slightly unsatisfying, and I think that's why the fandom has never fully accepted it. There are a lot of theories out there, and I gently point out that most of them are theories rather than information. There's a fairly widespread creepypasta about her that is entirely made up, and there's a persistent claim that the production team disliked writing her, which as far as I can tell, traces back to fan wikis rather than to anyone who worked on the show. I wouldn't repeat it as fact. The dull explanation is almost certainly the true one. Rachel was a high schooler in a show about middle schoolers. Her brother lives at that school, and she doesn't. Every story you write for her has to start by getting her into a building she has no reason to be in. She's structurally awkward, and shows quietly drop structurally awkward characters all the time. But went to college is a funny thing to put in a show where people can be deleted from reality for being uninteresting. It's the most ordinary possible answer in the least ordinary possible town. She still turns up in the comics, incidentally, which is a common fate for characters like this. The tie-in material becomes a kind of retirement home. You can't get on television anymore, but there's always the printed page. Hector is 100 yards tall. We know this precisely, and I love how we know it. In his episode, he falls over onto a football field, and he covers it, end to end. That's how the show tells you his height. Not with a line of dialogue, not with a caption. It just knocks him over onto a standardized American measuring device and lets you do the maths. 300 feet, 91 meters. There is a boy at Gumball School who is taller than most cathedrals. His episode is The Colossus, the second episode of Season 2 from 2012, and the premise is beautifully petty. Hector sends Gumball a friend request on Elmore Plus, which is the show's version of a social network that no longer exists, and Gumball has to decide what to do about it. That's the plot. A giant wants to be your friend online. Because here's the situation. Hector lives in a cave outside town with his mother. His mother is a witch. She keeps him calm, keeps him occupied, keeps his life extremely small and extremely quiet. And the reason for this is that when Hector gets upset, he levels the town. So Gumball and Darwin, having decided that Hector's life looks boring, set about improving it. They encourage him to stand up to his mum. They introduce him to a violent comic book. They generally apply the standard cartoon logic that a sheltered person needs to be liberated, and then he goes on a rampage, exactly as his mother said he would, and Gumball has to fix it. The fixing is the best sequence in the episode, and it's a straight lift from a video game. Gumball has to climb Hector's body to reach his ear and play the melody from his music box, which is the only thing that puts him to sleep, which means scaling an enormous humanoid while it's moving, grabbing handfuls of fur and clothing, working upward. That's Shadow of the Colossus, deliberately, precisely, shot for shot in places. Bokele has said it's his favourite game, and the episode isn't remotely subtle about it. There's also the small indignity that Gumball is too heavy for the flying broom, so he ends up starting his climb from the least dignified point on Hector's body, which rather undercuts the majesty of the reference. And the references keep going. Mrs. Jotunheim's design draws on Yubaba from Spirited Away, and the broomstick sequences nod at Kiki's delivery service. The family name itself is Jotunheim, which you can read on Hector's diary, and which in Norse mythology is the realm of the giants. That's a lot of layered homage for 11 minutes of a Cartoon Network show about a cat. There's a smaller detail I like more than any of the big ones. Hector has a hamster. The hamster is completely still and completely lifeless, and Hector doesn't know. Gumball works it out and starts to say something, and Darwin shuts him up. Nobody tells him. The episode moves on. That hamster is presumably still in that cave, and the ending is perfect for what this video is about. After everything, Hector's friend request is still sitting there. Gumball and Darwin look at it, consider the possibility of ever having to deal with any of this again, and smash the computer monitor with a hammer. That's the last note of the episode. They destroy the hardware rather than click accept. So what happened to Hector? Essentially nothing. For a very long time. He's around. He turns up in crowd shots and establishing shots because he's difficult to leave out of a wide angle of Elmore. He appears in a dream in one episode where he wishes he were normal-sized, but he doesn't lead anything. Until season 6 and an episode called The Potion, where Gumball and Darwin shrink him down, which is the show finally granting the wish from that dream, 6 years later, in an episode that almost nobody watched. And I mean that literally. The Potion is the least watched episode of the entire original run, with something like 0.42 million viewers in the United States. There's a small irony in the giant getting his moment in the smallest episode. His mother, oddly, did better out of the show than he did. She got a proper second showcase in The Sorcerer, where Gumball talks her into taking him on as a magic apprentice, and she comes off as one of the funnier adults in Elmore. Hector mostly just stands there, being enormous, being kept calm. Right, this one is my favourite piece of trivia in the entire show. In 2014, a Chinese company that makes dairy products commissioned an animated series to advertise goat milk. It was called Miracle Star. It ran for about 12 episodes before being cancelled, and it was Gumball. Not inspired by Gumball, not similar to Gumball. It copied character designs, animation style, and in some cases entire scenes shot for shot. There's a sequence in the first episode of Gumball involving a tower of shampoo bottles, and Miracle Star reproduced it with a tower of powdered milk instead. That's the level we're talking about. The lead character is a goat called Miao Li Xing, who occupies the Gumball position, and his brother is a frog called Gua Gua, who occupies the Darwin position. It went semi-famous in 2015 when someone uploaded a clip to YouTube under the title Chinese Gumball, and the internet did what the internet does. Two things about that setup that I think are genuinely fascinating. First, why goats? The answer is not artistic. They're goats because it was an advert for goat milk. The entire species of the main character is a product placement decision. Second, and this is the detail that always stops me, there is no Anais. The copy has a mum, a dad, a Gumball, and a Darwin, no little sister. And the reason is that the show was made in China during the one-child policy, and a family on television with 2 children, plus a younger daughter, wasn't going to fly. The frog counts as a pet, so he's allowed. Anais just doesn't exist in that version of the family. There's something quietly bleak about a bootleg being edited for domestic policy compliance. The theft was thorough enough to copy the shampoo tower and careful enough to remove the 3rd child. Now, Cartoon Network's response. They did not sue, they made an episode. The Copycats, Season 5, February 2017. Gumball and Darwin are in a supermarket, and they run into 2 children, a goat and a frog, who copy everything they say and do. Then the rest of the family find their own duplicates. And then Gumball works out that these people are the cast of a series called The Incredible World of Chi-Chi, which is making money online by reproducing the Wattersons' lives. The Wattersons try to make them stop by doing increasingly dangerous things, on the theory that the copycats will have to follow. This does not work, because the copycats are entirely willing to follow. A few production details that make this better. The storyboards originally used the actual Miracle Star designs, with the goat still named Kiki. Those got replaced with the Chi-Chi versions before production, and the team took legal advice specifically to make sure their parody of a plagiarist was different enough that the plagiarist couldn't come after them, which is a magnificently silly legal position to be in. You have to protect your right to make fun of the people who stole from you. Then there's the website gag. Gumball runs the copycat site through a machine translator, and the character bios come out mangled. The goat is described as the attention of the centre, a heavy party love hero with powerful personality defectives. The frog's bio asks why he is a frog and concludes that he is so green and mighty you wouldn't trust him with lunch. And there's a translation slip in there that's real linguistics rather than a joke. Ribbit's profile describes him as green, and he's blue. That's down to a colour word that historically covered both, which the modern language now splits. Whether that was a deliberate gag or a leftover from when the designs were direct copies, I couldn't tell you. Either way, it's in there. The episode also includes a musical number with mirrored animation, which is the sort of thing you can only really do once, and they did it very well. So what happened to Chi-Chi and Ribbit? Nothing. They never came back and they never needed to. They existed to say one thing on behalf of a production team who'd watched their work get lifted, and having said it, they went away. Miracle Star didn't last either. Both families are now just a thing that happened. Some things you only get to do once, and the Season 5 finale of Gumball is one of them. The episode is called The Puppets, and the setup is small and domestic. Gumball and Darwin find their old childhood puppet toys in the attic. Gumball wants to put them away, because they've outgrown them. Darwin doesn't, because Darwin has never outgrown anything in his life, and finds the idea of abandoning a toy genuinely upsetting. Then it turns out the puppets have opinions about being abandoned, and Darwin ends up somewhere else, and Gumball has to go in after him, and that's where the episode stops being a cartoon. The second half of The Puppets was made by Blink Industries, the studio behind Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Becky Sloan and Joe Pelling, who created that series, co-wrote the episode. Sloan voiced Howdy. Baker Terry voiced both Frank and Grady. The whole segment is real physical puppetry, shot on a set, dropped into the middle of a Cartoon Network show. The 3 puppets are Frank, Howdy, and Grady, and if you know the source material, you can see exactly where they come from. Frank is the furry mascot build with the visible strings in the red guy position. Howdy uses the shapes and colours of yellow guy. Grady wears a suit and has a cone-shaped head that reads as a beak if you squint, which puts him in the duck seat. Grady is also, in my opinion, the funniest of the three, entirely because of how flat he sounds. That completely level, mildly bored delivery, doing a children's television voice. The set itself is the actual house from the web series. They took it, repainted the whole thing in black and white, and stripped out every prop. So it's the same room, with everything removed from it. Which is a much better horror choice than building something new. You can't put your finger on why the space feels wrong, and it's because you've seen it before, with furniture in it. The production numbers are the bit that surprised me. Not counting pre-production, storyboarding or design, the puppet segment alone took roughly 3 months to make, for what amounts to about 5 minutes of an 11-minute episode. It was shown at the Annecy Animation Festival in June 2017, before it aired. 3 months of physical fabrication for 5 minutes of television. That's not how children's animation schedules usually work. Somebody clearly fought for that. Inside the puppet world, Gumball and Grady move through a landscape, assembled out of what a small child would have imagined, which is the detail I think people undersell. It isn't nightmare imagery for its own sake. It's the inside of a 7-year-old's playtime, rendered accurately. And the reason it's unsettling is that 7-year-old imaginations are quite unsettling, and we all agreed to forget that. There's a cheerful song about having fun. There's a sequence involving bowls of grease and toenails. It's about as far into the strange as the show ever went, and it went there in a season finale on a children's network, in collaboration with a web series famous for making people uncomfortable. The extended version of that world turned up separately in a set of shorts called Waiting for Gumball, which are worth finding if you've never seen them. They're less plot and more just letting the puppets exist and talk to each other, which is exactly what you want from that material. So what happened to Frank, Howdy, and Grady? They got sold at a garage sale. That's the ending. Gumball and Darwin escape the puppet world, and the toys go out on a trestle table on the driveway with a price on them. No confrontation, no destruction, no sealing them away in a box in the loft with ominous music. They're just sold to someone who took them home. I think that's a much better ending than anything more dramatic would have been, and it's the single most Gumball decision in the episode. The show built a hand-crafted horror set, took it to Annecy, collaborated with a cult web series, and then resolved the whole thing with a small ad in a local newspaper. Somewhere in Elmore, 3 puppets are in a child's bedroom right now. Nobody's checked. Now this next lot are slightly different, because they were never meant to stay. These are the ones built to be defeated inside 11 minutes, and it's worth going through a few of them together rather than one at a time, because the interesting thing is the pattern. Start with jealousy. Jealousy is a spirit that turns up in an episode called The Flower, and the mechanic is simple. Somebody gets violently jealous, and jealousy arrives and takes them over. You know when someone's possessed because they turn a shade of green, which is a nod to the phrase about being green with envy, and because their eyes light up, and because their reflection isn't them anymore. Gumball gets possessed, then Darwin, then Leslie, who is a flower and about as threatening as a garden centre, and then, at one point, Carrie. Carrie is already a ghost. That's what makes it funny. Jealousy possesses a ghost, which raises questions about the ownership structure of Carrie's body that the episode has absolutely no intention of answering. Jealousy is killed in the same episode he appears in and never returns as himself, though the show does occasionally have characters behave in exactly that way in later episodes without the green, which I've always taken as the writers making a quiet point about what the spirit was actually meant to represent. Then there's Gargaroth the Devourer from The Scam, a black blob from the underworld that eats souls, summoned by saying his name, unstoppable only by the sacrifice of a selfless hero. Which is a problem, because the show doesn't have one of those. What it does have is a lollipop and a gumball who does not want to give it up. The world is ending, the mechanism to stop it is a sweet, and the protagonist hesitates, not for long. But he hesitates, and the episode makes sure you notice. Then the game child, from the console. A cursed games console that turns Elmore into a role-playing game, with the whole town trapped inside as characters, and the Wattersons fighting their way through their own neighbourhood. And the detail I keep coming back to is that Gumball, having escaped it once, deliberately traps everybody in there a second time. Not for a noble reason, because he hadn't finished the game and wanted to complete it properly. Then Mr. Chanax from The Founder. Chanax is the cable company, and Richard wanders into their headquarters looking for a vending machine and gets mistaken for the mysterious founder of the entire corporation. The staff proceed to follow his instructions exactly, and Richard's instructions are the instructions of a man whose main interests are food and sitting down, and the company dissolves. There's a whole genre of villain in this show that isn't really a villain. It's an institution that collapses when a genuinely stupid person is placed at the top of it, and the show has an unusually good ear for that particular joke. What links all of these is that they're plot devices with faces, and they didn't need faces. A cursed console doesn't need to be a character. Jealousy could have been a mood, but Gumball gave every one of them a design, a voice, a personality, and a fate, spent real animation budget on them, and then binned them at the 11-minute mark. Elmore is absolutely full of things that got more effort than they strictly required. That's more or less the show's defining habit. Gumball's name is not Gumball. His legal first name, as established in an episode called The Name, is Zach. Everyone in his life, including his own parents, forgot this. It's on the paperwork and nowhere else. And once he finds out, he decides to use it, on the fairly sensible grounds that it's his actual name and it sounds better. What happens next is the part that makes this a story rather than a gag. He starts behaving differently, more confident, more cutting, more pleased with himself, in the way you'd expect from someone trying on a new identity. And you assume for a couple of minutes that this is just Gumball being a bit much, which is his default state anyway. Then it stops being an act. Zach becomes a separate person, and Gumball doesn't notice it happening until he's already lost control of himself. There's a visual tell for who's driving, and it's my favourite thing in the episode. When Zach is in charge, he pops the collar of Gumball's jumper. Gumball's jumper does not have a collar. It's a plain crew neck. He pops it anyway. That's such a precise piece of characterization. It tells you everything about Zach in one gesture. He is doing the body language of a person who is better than you, using equipment he doesn't have, and it doesn't occur to him to check whether it's working, because Zach's whole deal is that he's better than Gumball at everything, and he thinks ahead, and he doesn't make mistakes. He isn't lying about most of that. He genuinely does succeed at things Gumball fails at. The difference is what happens when he doesn't. Gumball, for all his ego, eventually admits when he's got something wrong. It takes him a while, and it usually takes a disaster, but he gets there. Zach doesn't. Zach's confidence is total and airtight, and has no mechanism for taking on new information, which is exactly how he loses. Gumball beats him at something, one thing, and that's enough because a person whose entire structure is built on never being beaten has nothing underneath the structure. Zach starts chipping apart, bright light showing through the cracks, and comes to pieces. Although calling it a body is generous, there wasn't a body. There was a name and a posture. Afterwards, Gumball goes and has his legal name changed back, which quietly makes this one of the very few episodes of the show with a permanent consequence in the paperwork of the world. And here's why Zach belongs in this video more than almost anyone else we've talked about. For the middle stretch of that episode, Zach is the protagonist. He's in the lead character's body, driving the plot, occupying the position the show is named after. He is, functionally, the main character of an episode of the Amazing World of Gumball. And he appears exactly once. There's no return, no ghost of him, no moment years later where he flickers back in a mirror, which is what almost any other show would have done with a split personality that was written this well. Gumball just used him, finished with him, and put him away. There's one more layer that I think is accidental, but I enjoy it anyway. The name Zack means remembered, more or less. It comes from a root about being remembered. And nobody remembered it. His own family forgot he had it. He had to find out from a document. I genuinely don't know whether that was deliberate. It's the sort of thing this show does often enough that I wouldn't put it past them. And it's also the sort of thing that fandoms find in names by accident. Either way, it's sitting there. There are 2 episodes where the show stops pretending it doesn't know what it's doing to its background cast, and they're very different from each other, which is why I want to take them together. The first is The Extras, from Season 3. It opens with Gumball and Darwin sitting in the cafeteria, complaining that it's a slow day and nothing much is happening. Standard filler dialogue. The sort of scene that exists to get you to the next scene. And behind them, at another table, a green bear stands up. He shouts, "Finally!" and starts singing. The song is a request. He wants to be noticed. He wants somebody to look at him. And as it goes on, more and more of the background characters join in. The ones with no names and no lines, and no purpose beyond filling out a room, until the entire back half of the cafeteria is performing a musical number aimed directly at the 2 people in the foreground. Gumball and Darwin are understandably quite shaken by this, and Gumball agrees to give them the episode. What follows is a set of clips that revisit moments we've already seen, but shot from the perspective of whoever was standing at the edge of them. Things that happened while the main plot was going on elsewhere. Which is a very cheap format on paper, and a genuinely warm one in practice because it takes the show's own back catalogue and points out that there were always people in the frame. The second is The Others, from Season 4, and it does something considerably stranger. Gumball discovers that Elmore Junior High contains students who are not in his class. That's the premise, not new students, not a different school. Just the fact that the building has other year groups in it, other corridors, other people who have been there the entire time, and that Gumball has been mentally editing them out because he's so accustomed to the universe being about him. The episode centres on a girl called Claire Cooper, and whenever it's with her, it changes genre. It stops being a surreal comedy and becomes a straight teen drama, the sort of thing with narration and rain and quiet realizations, dropped into a town where a peanut is dating a cat. Gumball keeps trying to take the story over. He keeps grabbing the narration, and at one point Claire tells him, quite plainly, that it isn't about him. He can't process the sentence, not metaphorically. The episode plays it as though she's speaking a foreign language, because the concept of a story he isn't in has no slot in his head to go into. The other students are the good stuff here. There's Jared, there's Mr. Cornet, and there's Wilson Bilson, who is a paper cutout assembled from several different drawings, part cheerleader, part goth, part football player, part majorette, which is precisely why he has an identity problem. He is literally made of other people's ideas about what a school student looks like. That episode also has a guest animation segment by Simon Landrin, whose style is all bold lines and stripped back shapes. So even the drawing changes when the focus moves off the main cast. And there's a joke in the credits that I think about a lot. The fake show within the show is credited to the real director and the real creator, and the cast card reads, starring Claire Cooper, as Claire Cooper, before falling off the bottom of the screen. Her own credit doesn't stay on screen long enough to be read properly, in an episode about not being noticed. Neither of these episodes fixes anything, by the way. The green bear went back to the background. Claire didn't become a regular. The extras made their case. got their 11 minutes, and returned to standing near things. But the show heard them out, which is more than most shows manage. This next lot is a slightly different kind of disappearance, and I think it's the one people notice most without being able to name it. The character stays, the version of them ends. Gumball has been voiced by a lot of people. Logan Grove had him at the start, from 2011. Then Jacob Hopkins took over around 2014. Then Nicholas Cantu from 2017 to the end of the original run. Then Duke Cutler for the shorts and specials that came afterwards. And now, in the revival, Alcaio Thiele. Darwin has had a similar run. Kwesi Boki first, then Terrell Ransom Jr., then Doniel T. Hansley Jr., then Christian J. Simon. Anais is now voiced by Keenza Syed Khan. The reason is the reason it always is. They cast actual children, and children grow. A 12-year-old cat can stay 12 indefinitely, but the boy playing him cannot, and at some point his voice drops and the character stops sounding like himself. Most shows handle this by quietly swapping the actor between seasons and hoping you're not paying attention. Gumball put it in an episode. There's an episode in season 3 called The Kids, and it addresses the whole thing directly. The characters' bodies change, and the in-universe explanation lines up with the out-of-universe one. Puberty happened. They have to be re-rendered. The show looked at the most awkward practical problem in children's animation and turned it into a plot, and the redesign it's talking about was real. Between the first season and the second, the models genuinely changed. Gumball and Anais had larger, rounder eyes with smaller pupils in season 1, and a softer, floppier way of moving. From the second season premiere onwards, the eyes became more oval, the outlines got thicker, and everything got better at fast physical comedy. Which means the season 1 versions of these characters don't exist anymore, either. Not in the way we've been talking about, not deleted, just superseded. If you go back and watch the first episodes now, they look like a slightly different program, about slightly different people. 2 performers held the whole thing together through all of it. Teresa Gallagher and Dan Russell have been there since the start, and between them they cover an absurd proportion of the cast. Gallagher does Nicole and Penny and Terry and Ms. Markham and Margaret Robinson and a stack of others. Russell does Richard and the Donut Cop and Marvin Finkelheimer and Patrick Fitzgerald and Jealousy and Mr. Chanax and quite a few more. So a good number of the one-episode characters we've been through tonight were played by the same 2 people who play the parents. Elmore is a much smaller town than it looks, staffing-wise, and there's one crossover in the casting that I find delightful, which brings us back to the copycats. Chi-Chi, the goat, the knockoff Gumball, was voiced by Jacob Hopkins, who was, at the time, the voice of Gumball. The show hired its own lead to play the character stealing his job. Ribbit was voiced by Terrell Ransom Jr., who was Darwin. So the entire counterfeit family was, in the recording booth, the actual family, doing an impression of themselves being ripped off. I don't know whether that was a practical decision about who was already in the building or a genuine joke, and honestly, it works either way. Not everything in this video stayed gone, and it's worth spending a bit of time on the returns, because the show's record here is better than you'd expect. Molly came back and stayed unremarkable, which we've covered. Rob came back and turned his grievance into a career. Hector got his moment years late in an episode almost nobody saw, and then in 2019 the show itself went into the same category. The original run ended in June 2019. Not with a finale particularly, it just stopped. There were plot threads left open, including some fairly significant ones about the nature of the world, and then there were no more episodes. A film was announced in February 2021. Then it was dropped, and its status was unclear for about 2 years, and everybody assumed that was the end of it. Bokele confirmed at the Annecy Festival in 2024 that it was still alive, though heavily reworked and rewritten. As of the most recent update he's talked about, He has a new angle on it, and it's still not out. So for a while, the whole programme was sitting in exactly the position it had spent 6 seasons writing episodes about. Finished, shelved, occasionally referenced, no confirmation either way. Then in July 2025, it came back. The wonderfully weird World of Gumball turned up on Hulu, produced by Hanna-Barbera Studios Europe, with Bockelay back and Matt Lazel and Eric Fountain developing it. A second batch of episodes followed just before Christmas, and a few days before that, the renewal came through for 2 more seasons after it, taking the thing through to a 4th. 7 years of nothing, and then a green light for years more. 2 details from the revival worth mentioning here, both of which are the sort of thing this video exists for. The first is the rewrite, which goes back to the mechanism we talked about earlier and establishes what it means at full scale. The place that holds forgotten characters is also what's waiting for the show itself. It'll take the universe when the series ends, or if the main cast ever work out what they are. Which means the thing that ate Rob and the thing that ends the programme are the same thing, and always were. The second is smaller, and I like it more. The revival's first run was 40 episodes. 2 production codes from that batch are unaccounted for. 2 numbers in the sequence with nothing attached to them. Nobody has said what they were, or why they aren't there, or whether they were ever made. They might have been retitled. They might have been dropped early. They might be nothing at all, a numbering quirk in a spreadsheet somewhere in a production office. But there are 2 gaps in the list, in a show about the world folding over the places where things used to be. I'm not going to build a theory on it. It's almost certainly administrative. It's just a nice thing to know is sitting there, unexplained, in the paperwork. Something I don't think gets said enough about Gumball is how much extended family the Wattersons have, and how rarely any of it shows up. Because on paper, that household is connected to a lot of people. Gumball has 2 grandmothers, and a fairly complicated arrangement of grandfathers, and almost none of them are part of the regular furniture of the show. Start with Frankie Watterson, who is Richard's dad. Frankie is a con man. That's the shortest honest description. He's charming in the specific way that people who have never held down a responsibility are charming, and every appearance he makes involves the family being pulled into something because he's very persuasive, and Richard is very keen to believe him. And the reason Frankie matters structurally is that he explains Richard. Richard Watterson is a grown man with 3 children who has never worked, who eats constantly, and who has the emotional regulation of a large toddler. And then you meet his father, and you understand that Richard was raised by someone who left, came back when it suited him, and made promises for a living. There's an episode where the family become convinced Frankie has been in prison and invite him to stay and start running the house on prison rules to make him feel at home, which is a very funny idea, and also, if you look at it sideways, a family desperately trying to make a difficult man comfortable enough to stay this time. Then there's Louis, who is Richard's stepfather, and Granny Jojo, who is Richard's mum, and who is the loudest and most alarming person in any room she's in. Jojo's around a fair bit actually, so she doesn't really belong in a video about vanishing, but there's an episode built around a vase she gives the family as a gift, which is so aggressively ugly that the entire plot is the Wattersons attempting to destroy it without her finding out. And that episode tells you more about how this family handles conflict than any dramatic scene ever did. They can't say, "We don't like it." They'd rather stage an accident. And then there's Nicole's side, which is where it gets genuinely interesting and which the show almost never touched. Nicole's parents are Daniel and Mary Senecourt. They exist. They're on the family tree. They turn up in a flashback episode about the choices Nicole made when she was younger, and the picture that emerges is not a warm one. Nicole was pushed hard. She was raised as a competitor, trained as a fighter, expected to achieve things, and what she did instead was fall for an idiot in a hospital corridor and build a completely different life out of spite and love in roughly equal measure. That's why she works at the Rainbow Factory. That's why she has that temper. That's why she is so extremely tightly wound about her children's futures. All of it traces back to two people who have barely been on screen, and I find that a really interesting choice, because most family sitcoms would have made those grandparents recurring. There's an obvious well of material there: awkward Christmases, disapproving looks, the mother-in-law who thinks her daughter married beneath herself. 20 seasons of easy episodes. Gumball did it once, properly, and left, which I think is the right call, actually. The Senecourts work as an explanation rather than as characters. The moment they turn up every fortnight to disapprove of Richard, they become a joke and stop being the reason Nicole is the way she is. Some backstory is load-bearing and shouldn't be walked on. So the extended family of the most watched cartoon family of the 2010s is, for the most part, a set of people who came in once, explained something important, and left before anyone got used to them. There's a version of this show that did the big family reunion episodes every season. It'd have been fine. It'd have been the standard thing. And I suspect the reason nobody remembers Gumball for its grandparents is precisely because it didn't do that, and instead kept them as the sort of relatives you only see at funerals, which is how a fairly large number of us actually experience extended family. Here's a category of one-time appearance that isn't really about characters at all. It's about hands. Gumball had a habit of handing entire sequences over to outside animators and letting them do whatever they liked, which means there are characters and moments in this show that exist in a visual language that appears exactly once and never comes back. The most famous of these is the fight in The Fury. Nicole against Yuki Yoshida, Masami's mother, in a sequence animated by a Studio 4DC in the style of high-energy 1980s shonen anime. Not a nod to it, not a gag about it. A properly executed, hand-drawn, speedline-heavy anime brawl dropped into the middle of a British-made Cartoon Network sitcom, with the sort of animation budget that sequence very obviously required. And what makes it work is that the show doesn't wink at you. There's no character in the frame going, "Why does everything look Japanese all of a sudden?" The style shift is treated as the correct way to depict two mothers having a serious fight, because for that particular scene, it is. Then there's the segment in The Others I mentioned earlier, handled by Simon Landrain, whose work is all clean, bold outlines and pared down shapes, which is a very different register, again, and lands in an episode already about seeing the school through somebody else's eyes. And then, at the far end of the spectrum, there's Anton. Anton is a slice of toast. He's a classmate. And he isn't drawn at all, or at least not entirely, because the show's approach to Anton frequently involves actual photography of actual bread. When something happens to him, and things happen to Anton constantly, the show tends to reach for real-world food imagery rather than animation. That's a properly strange thing to do to a recurring child character, and the reason it's funny is that it's so much more effort than the joke requires. Somebody had to go and photograph that. Somebody was in a studio with a slice of toast and a lighting setup, working out the shot. That's the pattern across the whole series, really. Characters designed, filmed and animated in different techniques, often several of them in the same scene, and the show never once tries to make them agree with each other. You get flat 2D next to CGI, next to stop motion, next to a photograph, next to a puppet, all in one classroom, all treated as equally real, which brings us back to where we started tonight. That disunity isn't a style choice made for its own sake. It's a consequence of the show being assembled out of unrelated leftovers, and then the production leaning into it hard enough that it became the identity of the whole thing. The thing about handing sequences to guest animators, though, is that it produces one-time characters by accident. A creature designed for a single Landrain-style segment cannot appear in a normal episode, because it wouldn't look right. It's not a member of the cast, it's a member of that particular visual world. And when the visual world closes, it goes with it. There's a whole population of Elmore residents who can never come back for purely technical reasons. Not deleted, just untranslatable. Since we're on the subject of how the show was physically made, let's talk about the backgrounds, because this is the fact that changes how the whole program looks once you know it. Elmore is supposed to be in California. Elmore is photographs of England. The show was produced in London and the backgrounds are built from real photographic locations, largely shot in and around the UK. Which means every time you look past a character in Gumball, you're looking at a real place that somebody stood in front of with a camera. The pavements are real pavements. The brickwork is real brickwork. The car parks are somebody's actual car park. And that's why the show has that particular texture that American-produced cartoons don't quite manage. It isn't stylized urban America. It's a slightly damp, slightly overcast, slightly municipal sort of place, with the light doing what light does at about 4:30 in the afternoon in autumn, and cartoon characters walking about in front of it. There's a specific effect this creates that I've never seen anyone name properly. The world feels older than the people in it. The buildings look like they were there first and the residents were added later, which, given how the cast was assembled, is more or less the truth. The production itself was international in a way that's slightly absurd for an 11-minute show. The creator is French. The studio was in London. It was the first full-length series produced by Cartoon Network's European operation, which is a substantial thing to hand to a first-time showrunner working from a folder of rejected adverts. The first season was made in collaboration with Boulder Media in Dublin and Dandelion Studios, and from the second season onwards, a large amount of the work ran through Studio Soy in Germany. Studio Soy stayed with it for the rest of the run, and they've been open about how far back their relationship with Bockley goes to when he was a junior at a London studio in the mid-2000s losing pitches. So you have a French creator, a British studio, Irish and German animation partners, a fictional Californian town, and real English photography underneath all of it. And it works. That's the part I find remarkable. It should look like a mess. Instead, it produced the most immediately recognizable visual identity of any cartoon of its era. You can identify a single frame of Gumball from across a room, which you cannot say about most of what was on television at the same time. There's a small consequence of the photographic backgrounds that's relevant to this video though. Locations in Gumball are as disposable as characters. A shop exists because somebody photographed a shop. If nobody goes back and photographs it again, that shop is a one-time appearance too. Elmore has entire streets that were used once. Buildings you've seen the inside of exactly one time. A whole geography that isn't consistent because it was never designed as a geography. It was assembled from wherever a camera happened to be. There's a shot early in the run of a wet pavement outside the school with the drain cover in it, and that drain cover is somewhere in England, and somebody photographed it, which is a very odd thing to say about a place that feels as solid as Elmore does. It has weight and depth and specificity, and none of it is planned. It's a collage of real England pretending to be a small American town, and the pretending is so relaxed that after about 2 episodes, you stop noticing. We've spent most of tonight on characters, but a fair proportion of what the show has quietly lost isn't people at all. The rubbish dimension we talked about earlier takes objects just as readily as it takes residents. Inventions that didn't work, games nobody played, prototypes, claims that turned out to be false, fashions that stopped being defensible, and the specific items you can spot in there are, I think, funnier than anything the episode does with its plot. There's the hairspray which the boys use to propel themselves around, and which is from the 1980s and is described as extremely toxic, which is a joke about propellants and about a decade, and also a small piece of social history, because that stuff genuinely was reformulated out of existence for very good reasons. There's Pluto, which I mentioned, and which I still find delightful. The universe decided Pluto was a mistake in the early 2000s, and the show took that literally and filed the planet with the failed inventions. And there's Janice. Janice is Mr. Small's great lost love, and Janice is a van, not a person who owns a van, not a person who resembles a van, a hippie van with a personality who he remembers only because of the foil on his head, and who he has been searching for with complete sincerity for an unspecified length of time. And when they find her, she won't start. The boys try hitting her, shouting at her, the standard percussive approach to unresponsive machinery. It doesn't work. Then Darwin tries being nice to her instead, and she starts. Which is a gag, obviously. It's also the emotional resolution of a subplot about a man who lost someone, and it's played entirely straight. And Janice is a van. That's Gumball in one scene, honestly. It will build a genuine emotional payoff, and then have the emotional payoff be about a vehicle, and it will not blink. There's a wider point in here about how this show treated objects generally. Elmore is a place where inanimate things are routinely people. The town has a talking cactus, a walking hot dog, a piece of toast in the class register, and a sun that occasionally has opinions. There's no line drawn between beings and stuff. Everything is potentially a person, and everything is potentially furniture, depending on what the episode needs. Which means the question of what happened to any given one-time thing in this show is open in a way it wouldn't be elsewhere. A prop in a normal cartoon just stops being drawn. A prop in Gumball might have been someone. I like the idea that the dimension full of discarded ideas contains, somewhere in the drift, a large number of objects with faces and names that we never met, because their episodes were never written. Not forgotten characters. Characters who never got to be forgotten because they were never introduced. That's probably too much thinking for a show about a cat. And I'm aware of it, and I'm not going to stop. There's a thing that happens to minor cartoon characters that almost nobody talks about, and Gumball is a good case study for it. They don't die. They get moved to the annex. The main show is the expensive place. Every minute of it costs money, and every character in it has to justify the frame they're standing in. So when a character isn't quite working, or isn't quite fitting, or is structurally awkward the way Rachel was, they don't get killed off. They quietly relocate to the tie-in material, where the economics are completely different. Gumball has a lot of annex. There are the comics, which have been running alongside the show for years, and which have their own continuity, their own stories, and a noticeably broader cast than the episodes ever used. Characters who managed a couple of appearances on television have full storylines in print. Then there's Darwin's Yearbook, a set of shorts framed as Darwin, going around the school, collecting entries in his yearbook, which is a format that exists specifically to give screen time to people who don't normally get it. That's where the one line about Rachel going to college turns up, in an entry about somebody else entirely, which tells you exactly what that format was for. It's a place to tidy up. Then there's the Gumball Chronicles, a later mini-series, and then the shorts and specials that filled the years between the original run ending and the revival arriving. And what all of this amounts to is a sort of holding pattern. The show ends. The characters don't quite. They keep turning up in smaller and cheaper formats, in a lower resolution, and at a lower priority for years. That's arguably a stranger fate than being deleted. There's an episode I mentioned earlier called The Spin-Offs, where Rob hijacks the programme and runs a set of pitches for what the show would look like if it were about anybody other than Gumball. And that episode is, on reflection, the most honest thing in the entire series about how this works. Because those pitches aren't cruel, they're not bad ideas, several of them look like shows you genuinely watch. The joke isn't that the other characters couldn't carry a programme. The joke is that there's only one programme, It's already got a name, and the name has a cat in it. Everyone else gets a pitch. Nobody else gets a series. I keep coming back to how much of Gumball's comedy is built on that specific frustration, and how unusual it is for a show to be that self-aware about its own hierarchy, while still functioning as a comedy for children. Most series pretend the ensemble is an ensemble. Gumball put the org chart on screen and let the people at the bottom of it complain about it in song. And then, in the way of these things, gave them a yearbook entry as compensation. Every long-running cartoon accumulates guest appearances, and Gumballs are worth a mention because they're mostly small, mostly odd, and mostly one-off by design. The best example is High Five Ghost. High Five Ghost is from Regular Show, which was made on the other side of the Atlantic by a different studio for the same network. And he turns up in a Gumball episode, voiced by J.G. Quintel, who created Regular Show, and voices Mordecai on it. That's a proper crossover, executed with no fanfare at all. He's just there. No episode-long team-up, no elaborate justification, no marketing push around it that I'm aware of. A character from another program walks through the frame in the correct voice and leaves, which I think is the ideal way to do that. The moment you build an event around a crossover, you have to write the event, and the event is almost always worse than the moment of recognition. Beyond that, the show's guest casting was generally more interested in getting the right voice than the famous voice, which is a very British production instinct, and which is why the cast list reads as it does. There's no long parade of film stars doing 11-minute favours. There's a small ensemble doing enormous numbers of parts, and the occasional specific person brought in for a specific reason. The clearest case of that is the puppet episode we went through, where the guest performers were the people who actually make the puppets, because nobody else was going to get those voices right. Sloane doing Howdy and Baker Terry doing both Frank and Grady isn't stunt casting. It's the correct hire, and the Chi-Chi arrangement is the funniest version of the same principle, for the reasons we've covered. There's a category of cameo in this show that's harder to define, which is the appearance of a real thing rather than a real person. Bits of actual photography, actual food, actual locations. Elmore is full of real objects doing guest spots, and they're as one-off as any character. That slice of toast was on set once. The wider point I'd make about all of this is that Gumball never treated a guest appearance as a reward for the audience. It treated it as a tool. Somebody turns up because that particular joke or that particular scene needs them, and then they don't turn up again because the joke is finished, which is a much healthier relationship with cameos than most long-running series manage. The temptation, when something gets popular, is to start bringing people back because people like them. And that's how you end up with a show that's mostly callbacks, performing its own greatest hits to a room that's slowly realising nothing new is happening. Gumball mostly resisted that. It kept introducing things it had no intention of keeping, which is why there are so many people to talk about tonight. One last thing before we finish, and it's structural rather than about any particular person. Gumball is an 11-minute show. That's the unit. Not 22, not 44. 11 minutes, which after titles and credits is somewhere around 9.5 minutes of actual story. For the first 3 seasons, these were produced in pairs as 22-minute episodes made of 2 11-minute segments, though in the United States, they generally aired separately anyway. From the 4th season onwards, the show stopped pretending and made them as individual episodes worldwide. And that format is, I'd argue, the single biggest reason this video exists. Because 9.5 minutes is not enough time to introduce a character properly, develop them, and integrate them into an ensemble. It's barely enough time to introduce them and use them. So the show developed a working method where a new character arrives fully formed, does exactly one thing extremely well, and is finished by the credits. That's why the one-off characters in this show are so much better than the one-off characters in most cartoons. They weren't sketches, they were complete. Hector is a whole person in 9 minutes. Rob's origin, motivation and grievance are established in 9 minutes. Zach is born, becomes the protagonist, and dies in 9 minutes. The format didn't allow for a slow build, so the show stopped attempting slow builds and got extremely good at the standing start instead. The trade-off is exactly what we've been going through tonight. If your method is to introduce a complete character every 11 minutes, you will produce an enormous number of complete characters, and you cannot possibly keep them. The maths doesn't work. 6 seasons at that rate generates more residents than any program could service. So Elmore fills up and keeps filling, and the show writes an episode about the fact that it's filling up and puts a green bear in the background of the cafeteria and lets him stand up and sing about it. I think that's the thing I actually admire most here, having gone through all of them. A show that produces disposable characters at industrial speed, and which is completely honest with itself about doing it, and which keeps stopping to acknowledge the pile. Not to apologise for it, just to look at it. Most series would rather you didn't count. Gumball put a bear in the back of a cafeteria and had him count out loud. And a strange consequence of that is that the forgotten characters of this show are collectively more memorable than the forgotten characters of programs that ran 4 times as long. Ask someone about Gumball, and there's a decent chance the first thing they mention is a giant, or a puppet, or a glitching cyclops with a grudge. Not the cat. Not always, anyway. It's worth spending a bit of time on the other side of this because we've been talking all night about the people who went, and the people who stayed are the reason the leaving registers at all. Gumball's classroom is a genuinely absurd room, and it's absurd in a way that rewards just listing it out. There's Banana Joe, who is a banana, and who is the loudest person in any given scene, and whose relationship with trousers has been an ongoing negotiation across the entire run of the show. There's Alan, a balloon, who is gentle and thoughtful and kind, and whom Gumball hates with an intensity that Gumball himself admits is completely unjustified. That's one of my favourite running jokes in the series, honestly. The protagonist has a nemesis, and the nemesis is a nice balloon, and the protagonist knows he's in the wrong and continues anyway. There's Carmen, a cactus who is Alan's girlfriend, which raises practical questions the show has had a great deal of fun with. There's Terry, who is drawn on a piece of paper, not represented as paper, actually a paper cutout with the fold lines visible, and a set of anxieties about germs and illness that are considerably better observed than a cartoon about a paper girl needed to be. There's Ocho, an 8-bit spider rendered in chunky pixels from an era of graphics that ended before most of the show's audience was born. There's Idaho, a potato, who is enormously sensitive about potato-related topics for reasons that are entirely fair. There's Duke, who communicates only in beatbox sounds, and who is subtitled for the audience roughly never. There's Bo Bear, a robot, who takes instructions literally in ways that have nearly ended the town on more than one occasion. There's Clayton, who can change shape and lies constantly. There's Anton, our slice of toast, who is destroyed regularly and comes back the next week because that's what happens when you buy bread in a packet. There's Tina Rex, the CGI Tyrannosaur, and Jamie, and Leslie the Flower, and Masami the Cloud, and Carrie the Ghost, and Penny, who spent the first several seasons inside a shell and then didn't. And here's the thing I keep noticing when I lay them out like that. None of these characters have anything to do with each other. They are not from the same world. They're not from the same century of animation in some cases. A pixelated spider and a photographed piece of toast and a hand-drawn cactus and a rendered dinosaur are 4 completely incompatible design philosophies, and they're sitting in adjacent chairs having a conversation about homework, which takes us straight back to where all this started with the folder. That classroom is the reject drawer, tipped out onto a desk. But the reason they stayed and the others didn't is worth being honest about, and it isn't quality. Rachel isn't worse than Banana Joe, Molly isn't less interesting than Idaho, and the show made an entire episode about how she is, which is a joke rather than an assessment. They stayed because they were in the classroom. That's it. Being in the room where the show happens is the whole qualification. Everyone in that register got dozens of chances to accidentally become memorable, and everyone outside it got one. I find that oddly comforting rather than depressing, and I've been trying to work out why. I think it's because it's true of most things. Almost nobody is where they are because of a decision anyone made about their worth. They're there because they were in the room. I want to talk about the quiet ones for a minute, because Gumball has a handful of episodes that go somewhere completely different in tone, and they tend to be the ones people remember years later without being able to say why. The clearest example is an episode called The Night, which is about the town going to sleep. The whole population of Elmore is dreaming simultaneously, and the dreams start bleeding into each other, and the episode moves between them, which means you get to see what the residents of this town are like when nobody's performing. And what you find out is that most of them are sad in small manageable ways. Hector dreams about being the size of other people. That's it. That's the giant's dream. Not power, not destruction, not being taken seriously. Being able to stand in a room with his classmates. That's a detail I mentioned earlier, and I'm bringing back for one specific reason. That wish sat there for years, and then in the 6th season, the show actually granted it. In a shrinking episode, almost nobody watched. The dream and the payoff are separated by an enormous stretch of television, and I don't know whether anyone planned that or whether a writer went back through the archive and found something to use. The night episodes work because the show's usual mode is very loud. Gumball at full speed is one of the fastest cartoons of its era. Everything is escalating, everyone is shouting, the animation is doing 4 things at once. So when it stops, the stop has real weight. There's a particular quality to how the show handles quiet, which is that it doesn't get poetic about it. It doesn't reach for beautiful language or a sweeping bit of score. It just slows down and lets the characters be tired, and lets the backgrounds do the work. And those photographic backgrounds are extremely good at looking like 2:30 in the morning, because they were photographed in a country where it is frequently overcast. Which is, I suspect, part of why this show works so well as something to fall asleep to, and part of why we're doing this at all. There's a rhythm to Elmore at night that a lot of American-made cartoons never quite achieve, because they're built on bright saturated colour and permanent daylight. Gumball has weather. It has grey afternoons, it has streetlights in the rain and empty car parks, and the particular flatness of a suburban road with nothing happening on it. And the show puts strange things in those spaces. A quiet street with something wrong at the end of it. A supermarket at an hour when supermarkets shouldn't be open. A school corridor with the lights off and something in it. None of it is horror exactly. It's just a world that keeps going after the plot has clocked off. I think the reason the vanished characters land as well as they do in this show, rather than just being trivia, is that Gumball had already established that Elmore continues when you're not looking. Once a program has shown you its town at 3 in the morning, the idea that somebody could go missing from it feels physically plausible rather than like a writing decision. There are streets in that show that only exist at night, and there are people who were only ever on them once. The revival has been going for a while now, and one thing it's had to do is restock. Because a show coming back after that long faces a specific problem. The regulars are all still there, and the audience wants them, but a series that only serves its existing cast becomes a museum quite quickly. You need new arrivals, and a show with Gumball's habits is always going to generate them at speed. So the new run has done what the old run did. It has introduced things, used them, and moved on. The material that's come out of it so far includes an evil fast food empire, which is very much in the tradition of the corporate satire the original run did well, and a sentient artificial intelligence with feelings for Nicole, which is the sort of premise that could only work in a town where the rules of existence were always negotiable anyway. There are episodes about Darwin becoming a power-hungry witch, and about promposals, and about Banana Joe and the trousers question, which apparently remains unresolved after all this time. And there's the rewrite, which we've touched on, and which is the revival taking the show's oldest anxiety and making it explicit. What I find interesting about the return is the scale of the commitment. That first order was split into 2 halves by the streamer for reasons that made sense to somebody, and a renewal for 2 more seasons landed before the second half had even gone out. The people in charge of it were quite clearly pleased with what they were getting. There's a line from the studio side about how fans wouldn't have to wait that long again, which is the kind of thing executives say, but in this case it's backed by an actual order. And the production has moved on as well. It's Hanna-Barbera Studios Europe now, rather than Cartoon Network Studios Europe, which is a rebrand rather than a relocation. And Studio Soy are still involved, which means the German end of this has now been attached to Gumball for well over a decade. Bockley came back as a showrunner alongside Matt Lazel and Eric Fountain, and there's a new voice cast for the children, for the obvious reason. The film, meanwhile, remains where it has been for years, which is not quite anywhere. Announced, dropped, confirmed, still alive, rewritten, re-angled. At some point it will presumably arrive and everyone will have forgotten how long it took, which is how these things generally resolve. The thing I'd say about all of this from the perspective of a video about forgotten characters is that the revival is going to generate its own version of tonight's list. It's already started. There are characters in those new episodes who have appeared once and will not appear again, and in a few years somebody will make a video about them, and I'd like to think one of them will be excellent enough to be worth the trouble. That's the only way a show like this can work. Keep making people you can't afford to keep. There are a few loose ends in this show that were never tied, and I want to go through them without making a mystery out of any of them, because they're not mysteries, they're just gaps, and gaps are quite nice to think about at this hour. The first is the ages. Gumball is 12, Darwin is 10, Anais is 4, and she's a grade above both of them, which the show has confirmed and has never seriously attempted to justify beyond her being extremely clever. All 3 of them have been those ages for a very long time. Every child in Elmore Junior High is in a permanent holding pattern, in the way cartoon children always are, and the show occasionally acknowledges this and then carries on regardless. Which is fine, and standard, and completely normal for the format. But it sits oddly against everything we've been talking about tonight. Rachel got to leave for college. She aged out. Nobody else can. The only person in the show who was allowed to grow up is the one who disappeared. The second is the geography. We've covered why Elmore doesn't have a consistent layout, and it's a production reason rather than a story one. But the show never explains it in universe, which means Elmore is officially a town where the roads don't necessarily connect to the same places twice. Some of that is animation convenience. Some of it, given the way the show talks about its own world folding over gaps, is arguably canon. The third is the school itself. Elmore Junior High has a teacher who is a fossilized primate of indeterminate but enormous age, a principal who is a large amphibian and who is in a relationship with her, and a counsellor whose qualifications are never established, and whose main contribution is being correct about conspiracy theories. It has a class register that includes bread. The show has never once suggested that any of this is unusual, and nobody has ever inspected the place. The fourth is the money. The Wattersons are permanently broke. That's a fixed condition of the show. Richard doesn't work. Nicole carries the whole household on one factory wage. And there are episodes built entirely around the family being unable to afford something ordinary. And yet Gumball and Darwin on several occasions casually earn enormous sums in the space of an afternoon and then never mention it again. Nobody has ever addressed that. The money arrives, the episode ends, and the following week they're counting coins for a sandwich. I've decided that's a rule of the world rather than an oversight, mostly because the alternative is thinking about it too hard. Something I've only touched on in passing tonight is how much of this show is musical, and how many of its songs exist for exactly one scene and then never come back. Gumball is not a musical. It doesn't have a format where characters burst into song, and most episodes have no singing in them at all. But when it decides to do a number, it commits completely, and the numbers are almost always attached to the material we've been going through. The Green Bear's song in the cafeteria is the clearest case. That's a full production. It builds, it brings in more voices as it goes. It has an actual structure, and it exists to make a point about background characters that the episode could have made in a line of dialogue. The mirrored number in the copycat episode is another one, and it's a technical piece as much as a musical one, because the whole joke depends on the animation being reflected precisely while the song runs. That's not a thing you can throw together in an afternoon. Then there's the song in the puppet world, which is cheerful and about having fun, and is one of the more unsettling things Cartoon Network has broadcast, entirely because of the gap between what it sounds like and what's happening around it, and the revival has leaned into this. The new episodes reportedly feature original music numbers as a regular part of what they do, with a new composer and a new theme, which suggests somebody decided the songs were a strength worth formalising. Here's what I find interesting about the show's relationship with music, though, and it connects to everything else we've talked about. The songs are disposable in exactly the same way the characters are. Nothing recurs. There's no signature number the show goes back to. Nobody has a leitmotif. A song exists for one scene, does a specific job in that scene, and is then thrown away no matter how much work went into it. That's an unusual amount of confidence for a production to have. Most shows that manage a genuinely good musical number will find reasons to bring it back, because good material is expensive and reusing it is free. Gumball apparently decided that the whole point of a song is the moment it happens in. There's a version of this program where the extras song became the show's anthem, where it turned up in the credits and in the marketing and got reprised in the finale, and the Green Bear became a mascot. That's the obvious commercial move, and it was clearly available. They didn't take it. He sang once and went back to his table. I don't know whether that was principle or just the pace of production, and I suspect the honest answer is that when you're making 11 minutes at a time, you don't have the room to be sentimental about anything. You use it and you move on to the next one, which is, in the end, the same reason Elmore is full of people we can barely remember. The show was never precious, not about characters, not about songs, not about the fact that it had built something worth keeping. I want to end the main body with Penny, which might seem like an odd choice for a video about forgotten characters, because Penny is not forgotten. She's the girlfriend. She's on the poster. She's one of the most important people in the show. But there are versions of Penny that appeared once, and I think they belong here. For the first several seasons, Penny is a peanut with antlers. That's the design. It's one of the more famous strange character designs in modern cartoons, and it's exactly the sort of thing that comes out of a folder of rejected commercial artwork. Then there's an episode where she comes out of the shell, and what's underneath is not a peanut. What's underneath is a shapeshifter, a fluid, changing thing that becomes whatever it feels like, and that moves between forms depending on emotion, and that had been sitting inside a rigid outer casing her entire life, because that's what her family does. Her father is furious about it. In a later episode that deals with the whole family and their attitude to shells, and the show handles that with more care than it strictly needed to. There's a lot going on in that storyline about families who insist on presentation, and about being told that what's underneath is unacceptable, and the programme lets it be about whatever the viewer needs it to be about, rather than spelling it out. Now here's the bit that's relevant to tonight. When Penny changes form, she becomes a series of creatures. Some of them are on screen for a couple of seconds. A shape, a texture, a set of proportions, one expression, and gone. Each of those is a design that somebody drew. Somebody sat down and worked out what that version looked like, and how it moved, and what it read as emotionally, for 2 seconds of television and no repeat appearance. That's a one-time character, by any reasonable definition. It's just one that happens to be the same person as a main cast member. And once you start counting those, the number gets very large. Every dream sequence in this show has residents in it. Every alternate reality has a population. Every fantasy, every video game world, every stylistic detour has creatures in the background who are designed and animated and never used again. The show's actual character count is not the cast list. It's something considerably bigger and completely uncountable, spread across 240 episodes of a program that never met a background it didn't want to fill. Which means the honest answer to the question in the title is that nobody has ever counted, and nobody sensibly could. Somewhere in a production folder, there are hundreds of designs that got 2 seconds each. I quite like that the number is unknowable. It would be a worse show if somebody had the list. Before we finish, a few names that don't get a full section, but that I'd feel bad leaving out entirely. This is the part of the video where I'm essentially just reading a list, and I'd argue that's exactly what you want at this hour. Larry Needlemeyer first, because Larry is the closest thing Elmore has to an actual functioning economy. Larry works everywhere. He's on the till at the supermarket, and behind the counter at the fast food place, and at the video shop, and the petrol station, and roughly every other business in town, often apparently on the same day. It's a running gag for years, and then the show does an episode where Larry takes Gumball and Darwin through his actual working day and hands them all of his jobs for 5 minutes to see how they get on. They do not get on. What I like about Larry is that the joke has an edge to it that the show never over-explains. He isn't a magical, ubiquitous character. He's a man with a very large number of low-paid jobs, which is a real thing that real people do, and the programme leaves it there. Then there's Marvin Finkelheimer, an extremely old man who turns up in various municipal situations and who is voiced, like a great deal of Elmore, by Dan Russell. He's part of the general background population of adults that the show maintains without ever quite committing to. There's the Donut Cop, which is a police officer who is a donut, and who exists primarily so that the phrase Donut Cop can be true. There's a hot dog man who has never been given a name in the way normal characters are given names, and who is simply the hot dog. There's Mr. Robinson next door and Margaret Robinson, who are the neighbours and who occupy the specific sitcom position of being appalled by the family in the next house. Mr. Robinson has had proper episodes and proper storylines and is one of the better developed adults, so he doesn't belong on a forgotten list. But his wife is around a lot less, and the pattern of the neighbour couple, where one half gets the plots and the other half gets the doorway, is not unique to this show. There's a school news presenter and a fair number of teachers whose names I'd have to look up, and who I suspect the writers would have to look up as well. And then there's the enormous silent category, which is where most of the town actually lives. The construction workers, the hobo, the various police officers with different food-based body plans, the green security guard, the people who are geometric shapes with faces, who exist as a sort of visual filler population, the animals who are just animals, the children in the corridor who were drawn once for one crowd shot and then reused for 8 years because it would be mad not to. Some of those have names on fan-maintained lists, which is an impressive undertaking and also slightly haunting. There are people out there who have catalogued every hexagon with a face that has ever been on screen in this programme. And this is the honest limit of a video like this one. I've called it every one-time character, and it isn't, and it never could be. What it is, really, is the ones with enough substance to talk about for a few minutes. There's a very long tail underneath that, made of characters who have a design and a colour and possibly a single line and no story and no fate and nothing to say about them beyond the fact that somebody drew them, which is, in its way, the most accurate representation of a town that this show ever managed. Because that's what a town is, a small number of people you know something about, and then thousands of people you'd recognise on the street and could not tell a single fact about, all of whom have their own thing going on that you will never learn. Elmore is a made-up place assembled from rejected drawings and photographs of English car parks, and it has that quality more convincingly than most fictional towns that were designed on purpose. Somebody in that town is on their fourth shift of the day. Somebody is a hexagon. Somebody has been standing in the same corridor since 2011 waiting for a line that is not coming, and that's where I'll leave the list. Though it isn't finished and can't be. What I keep landing on, having gone through all of them, is how neatly the shape of this show matches the shape of how it got made. A man collected the characters nobody had wanted and built a town out of them. That town then developed a habit of deciding which of its own residents were worth keeping. And then, more than once, the show went back and fetched some of them out again and gave them a song, or an episode, or a name in the credits that slid off the bottom of the screen before you could read it. That's a peculiar loop for a Cartoon Network programme about a cat to be running. It's also, I suspect, a fair part of why people are still talking about it years after it ended and years into it not being ended anymore. The rescues are the bit I'd want to hold on to if I had to pick something, not the deleting. Elmore is a world with a bin in it, and the show made a point of climbing into the bin on several occasions with a torch and a tinfoil hat. Nobody had to write that episode. Molly wasn't going to sue anyone, so Hector is somewhere out past the ring road, being kept calm. The puppets are in a cupboard, in a house that bought them for pocket change. Rachel is at college officially, and I've decided to believe it. Molly is in the third row of a classroom being unremarkable, which the world once found unacceptable and appears to have let go of. And a badly rendered boy is standing just outside the frame, right about nearly everything, waiting for somebody to hear him.